with you all, albeit in a virtual setting. Inshallah, the situation in society at large, be it the COVID situation or the other struggles that we experience, we hope that as soon as possible, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alleviates these struggles and these pains so that we can enjoy each other's company, as the keeping company of mu'mineen, of course, is one of the great blessings that we have, and we hope to be able to continue that in the near future, inshallah. What I'd like to do in the time that I have tonight is to share just some reflections on what I think are some of the keys of the perseverance of the movement of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salatu wassalam. There's a lot, obviously, that can be said, but if we want to focus our attentions on what is it that makes this movement for return to the pristine prophetic community and that prophetic experience, as the Imam mentions in his writing to his brother Muhammad ibn Hanafiya about being in pursuit of Islah. إنما خرجت لطلب الإصلاح لأمة جدي صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم, that there's an intentionality in trying to return, or at least direct the community at large, to what was that prophetic experience and what was that prophetic community. So in our commemoration of an event like this, with the love that we show, with the participation in the grieving, we also are looking for a plan of action and what will help us also orient ourselves individually, but also as a community, how we can study this event and what is it that makes this event unique, and how can we try and replicate that in our pursuits of creating communities that resemble the community of the Prophet. Peace and blessings be upon him. So what I'd like to do is just list these 7 points that I found to be worthy of further study, and I'll make some introductory comments on each of them, hopefully, and then from there I hope that there will be an opportunity, if not tonight but in the future. I know that my talk will kind of will lead to Maghribin Salat, so there may not be an opportunity for question and answer, but at some point in the future for us to be in conversation about how we understand these and how we can implement them, inshallah. So the first, kind of at a higher level, is to look at this event and this success, the way that it happened to be destined in the will of Allah. Quran speaks a lot about the occurrences in the world as being tied, of course, to God's will. And it's really important for us to remember that our understanding of the world and our theology proper is very much, is built on this notion that nothing happens in all of existence save for it to be the will of God. So this is also one of those things. And when I mention this, I don't want us to take our attention more so to some of these conundrums of whether this was predestined and whether the Imam had or his companions had agency in deciding whether they go or not. These may be important questions, but they're not questions that particularly, they're not ones that I think are necessarily productive for our purposes. But in any case, if we look to the Quran, we see this notion. In Surah Al-Qasas, for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, وَرَبُّكَ يَخْلُقُ مَا يَشَاءُ وَيَخْتَارُ مَا كَانَ لَهُمُ الْخِيَرَةُ سُبْحَانَ اللَّهِ وَتَعَالَى عَمَّا يُشْرِكُونَ. That it is your Lord, your nurturer, that creates whatever he wishes and whatever it is that he chooses, وَيَخْتَارُ. And they have no choice. مَا كَانَ لَهُمُ الْخِيَرَةُ. Of course, this is happening in a particular context, but the larger point is also true. Our agency is only through the blessing that God has given us. So the choice ultimately belongs to God of what happens and what doesn't. Immaculate is Allah and exalted above having any partners that they ascribe to him. So for us, any kind of action that we want to take, any sort of any sort of advancement that we hope to seek in the resemblance of the Husseini kind of movement and the Husseini reform within our community has to happen within this larger framework. And again, this is a reminder to us that our efforts are really important, but we have to remember there should be a constant check of whether what we do is pleasing to Allah, and what can we do that would be most pleasing to Allah. And in Surah Al-Kahf, Allah states, وَلَا تَقُولَنَّ لِشَيْءٍ إِنِّي فَاعِلٌ ذَلِكَ غَدًا. Do not say about anything that I will indeed do it tomorrow with certainty. إِلَّا أَن يَشَاءَ اللَّهُ وَاذْكُرْ رَبَّكَ إِذَا نَسِيتَ وَقُلْ عَسَى أَن يَهْدِيَنِي رَبِّي لِأَقْرَبَ مِنْ هَذَا رَشَدًا. Don't say that I will do anything tomorrow without adding this qualification of if God shall will. And when you forget something, remember your Lord and say, maybe my Lord will guide me to something more akin to rectitude than this. Right. So in this notion of the success of the movement of Imam al-Hussein in Karbala being the will of God, I think it's an interesting exploration for us to put this construction of nation, the Muhammadan nation, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, in conversation with the nation of Imam al-Hussein, which is really just a continuation of that, to how the Quran speaks about the construction of the nation of Ibrahim alayhi salam. I won't go into much detail, but I think these parallels are worthy of our further study. Quran says in Surah An-Nahl, ayah 120, Inna Ibrahim kana ummatan, that indeed Ibrahim himself was a nation. قانتا لله حنيفا. He was a obedient individual to Allah, a Hanif. ولم يكن من المشركين. He was not a polytheist. So in the nation building project that is Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam, it's really interesting for us to study what it is that he did and the foundations that he laid that allowed this nation to be constructed. And I just want to draw our attention to a number of du'as that Ibrahim alayhi salam makes and how we see that continuity. So the point here really is to study the community building, nation building project of Ibrahim alayhi salam, and not to see it as being different or separate from that prophetic construction and then the Husseini construction. One of the du'as that he makes is Rabbi habli hukman wa alhiqni bis salihin. Oh Allah, grant me that judgment and unite me with the righteous, those who do good. وَجَعَلْ لِي لِسَانَ صِدْقٍ فِي الْآخِرِينَ. And make me someone who is of worthy repute among those who follow, among the posterity. So again, he's asking to make me in a way that in the eyes of future generations, I will be remembered and I will be revered because of because of the successes that I had, because of the accomplishments, because of the convictions and the loyalty that I had to those things. These are the same kind of ideas I hope that we're thinking about too in our construction of community. We want Allah to grant us obviously these judgment in the decisions that we make, but also we want to make sure that we're inclined towards proximity and presence with the righteous. And when people look back at us, future generations look back at us, they can look and say, wow, the work that was done was calculated and it was one that followed some, a clear trajectory of what they wanted to do. Just on a tangent, from time to time, we hear this, the frustration that despite a lot of the good work that is done in communities and maybe across the nation, there doesn't seem to be really much of a final product. There doesn't seem to be a promised land. There doesn't seem to be a destination of sorts that we're working towards. Much of it seems ad hoc, and we only focus on what's directly in front of us. And of course, that short-sightedness leads to a lot of complications down the road. So Ibrahim is asking for that. And then he's asking the construction of that nation, the coming of a progeny that will continue that work, but also he wants to be in relationship with people in a certain way. He says, رَبَّنَا إِنِّي أَسْكَنْتُ مِنْ ذُرِّيَّتِي بواد غير ذي زرع عند بيتك المحرم ربنا ليقيم الصلاة. O my Lord, I settled part of my descendants in a barren valley, and we know the story of the relocation of Ibrahim and his family, or part of his family, as the ayah is saying, and the revival of the Holy Lands in Mecca. عند بيتك المحرم ربنا ليقيم الصلاة. So we did this for the establishment and the maintenance of prayer. So our settling here was purposeful. So again, tangent. In our settling and resettling, unless we fall in a category of seeking refuge and we're refugees and we don't really have agency and control over our living situations, we want our movements, we want our settling to be purposeful. So Ibrahim is saying that there's purpose here. فَجْعَلْ أَفِئِدَةً مِّنَ النَّاسِ تَهْوِي إِلَيْهِمْ. So make the hearts of a part of the people fond of them. So look, this is a mission. It's a mission that Ibrahim alayhi salam, with the divine instruction, has brought his family here to establish this this category of prayer. And now for this mission to be successful, he's making this dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, despite this very difficult project that they have. What will make this successful is if the hearts are, attracted to them, not just as individuals, that's a part of it, but also the larger attraction is because of what they stand for and what they're doing. وَارْزُقْهُم مِّنَ الثَّمَرَاتِ لَعَلَّهُمْ يَشْكُرُونَ, and provide them with your fruits so that they may give thanks. In some of the reports we have that the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, made a similar dua when Imam al-Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam was born, at least this portion of فَجَعَلَ أَفِئِدَةً مِّنَ النَّاسِ تَهْوِي إِلَيْهِمْ. So make the hearts of a part of the people fond of them or of him. So this attraction again of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam and Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam is drawing from this. It's not just a love for love's sake. They're worthy of our love. They're worthy of our attraction. They're worthy of our relationship, of course. And we see this in the remarks of Lady Zainab, salamullah alayha, in the courtyard of Yazid. She speaks about, this is who we are. This is how we are supported. This is how God speaks of us. And this is how you are. There's no way that we can change positions. There's no way that our status and stature will change, despite you being in a position of power and control and dominance, and we being in a state of being controlled and oppressed. We will always be who we are, dignified. We will always be who we are, honored. But the larger point is this: for us, in relationship with Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam, with the Imam alayhi salam, it's important not to miss the bigger picture. The bigger picture is a nation-building project, like the project of Ibrahim. So when the dua is made for Ibrahim to say, "Oh Allah, I want you to approximate the hearts and the souls of the people to this progeny that's working on this project of reviving this barren land for the purposes of establishing the concept of prayer," Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam is doing the same thing. He's asking the same thing. And that almost like mystical, mysterious love and attraction that has only grown throughout the century and has persevered despite so much oppression and so much persecution is something that is it's a means for us to be in a relationship for something much more. So it's thinking about what is it the Imam that's drawing us towards. They're not drawing us towards themselves for their own sake. Now, maybe this is beyond my level of comprehension, and you say, no, actually, they are pulling us to themselves because of their own sake, because they are the truth, and they are the reality, and they are the hidayah, and they are the haqq. Fine, but at a lower level of understanding where I am, there's definitely a component of the Ahlul Bayt drawing us towards themselves to then make us a part of and help us appreciate better this Abrahamic nation-building project. So for us, that takeaway, number one of it being the will of God, The will of God is what exactly? The will of God includes the component of the martyrdom, the massacre, the pain, the grief, the suffering, the tradition of persecution. All of that is there. But it also is drawing our attention and pulling us in relationship to something more. And it's really important for us to remember that. So that's number one. It's this notion of what makes this experience in history something special and it perseveres. It's because the will of God is behind it. And what is the will of God directed towards? I offered some reflections that I think would be worthy of further exploration. That's number one. Number two is the component of righteous action. So the Quran speaks about righteous action profusely. There's hardly a time where we see characterization of good people without the component of action being there. So, for example, in Surah Al-Bayyinah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ أُولَٰئِكَ هُمْ خَيْرُ الْبَرِيَّةِ. So those who have believed and are doers of good deeds, of righteous deeds, of salihat, they surely are the best of creatures. So naturally the question is, what is this amalun salih that is the becomes the designation of being the best of God's creations? So amalun salih is any action, we can say fundamentally, that corresponds to its divine decree. So let me break this down. What does that mean? An action that corresponds to its divine decree. So sometimes there are things that are not to our liking. So we are tasked to do something, but we don't necessarily want to do them. We don't necessarily find them to be the most effective way of doing things. They're distasteful to us. They're uncomfortable. And that's why it's really important to understand amalun salih in the context of iman. So a good act is not just a good act in the Quranic worldview. A good act in amalun salih is one that is done in conjunction with iman. Which means sometimes doing good things are not good. Sometimes doing not so good things are good. Let me explain what I mean by this without getting into a whole discussion on ethics. Look, when the Quran speaks about iman, what is the iman? The iman is an element of identifying what it is in our context that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has instructed us to perform. Right? So we're not tasked with just doing things in the abstract that are good things to do. For us, it's observing our situation, our living circumstances, what's happening in our world, and producing action that corresponds to those responsibilities. So we hear this from time to time. It says like, giving charity in the form of monetary donation is a good thing. But sometimes a situation calls not for a monetary gift, but a physical intervention. So I'm about to fall off a cliff and I need help. Can I benefit from your monetary donation? Maybe. I have other things going on in my life that maybe that would help me. But right now I need just someone to grab me so I don't fall over. So though giving money is not a bad thing, it's a good thing. In this case, that's not what you're tasked with. That's not what I'm tasked with. We're tasked with helping a person. Person may be drowning. It's not good. Let's say the person's of the opposite gender. It's not good to touch someone of the opposite gender if you're not mahram, especially, right? That's a not good thing. You can say it's a bad thing. You can say it's a sin. But when a person is drowning and their life is at stake, what is it that we're called to do? We're called to the preservation of life, which means that bad thing in the abstract now becomes not just a good thing, it becomes a necessary thing. So if I jump in and I help someone, and in that process of trying to save them, I'm forced to kind of like touch them physically, that's not considered to be a sin. That becomes the kind of like the highest form of doing good. That becomes an instance of amilus salihat. So iman becomes a really important factor in helping us understand what are these good things that we're supposed to be doing. I think one of the things that we're challenged with is, alhamdulillah, I think the production of good in the Muslim world is a lot. There's plentiful production of good things. It's whether the good things that are being done are contextualized. And that's why the idea of wilaya is so important. Wilaya, not just in the form of like a political hierarchy. It's really so frustrating how sometimes people, have this myopic way of looking at concepts because of their own socio-political experiences. Wilaya is some sort of, no, it's not. Wilaya is it's about being in an intense relationship with one another to the point where you're able to understand what your responsibilities are to one another. So because of that, amal salih is determined by those circumstances. So look, in the example of Nabi Nuh alayhi salatu wasalam and his son, in Surah Hud it says, قَالَ يَا نُوحْ إِنَّهُ لَيْسَ مِنْ أَهْلِكَ. The son of yours doesn't belong to this ahl. You want to call it this spiritual family, you want to call it your real family, whatever. إِنَّهُ عَمَلٌ غَيْرُ صَالِحٍ. So the son is characterized as being the epitome of unrighteous action. How is that even possible? فَلَا تَسْأَلْنِ مَا لَيْسَ لَكَ بِهِ عِلْمٍ. The ayah continues, so do not ask me about something that you have no knowledge. إِنِّي أَعِذُكَ أَن تَكُونَ مِنَ الْجَاهِلِينَ. I advise you, lest you should be among the ignorant. So what's so ignorant about the request that Nuh is making for his son, right? And if you look at the ayahs that preceded, and I won't get into that because we don't have time, unfortunately, but look at those ayahs starting from ayah 40 all the way to 46 that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes this very harsh kind of, or very firm at least, statement about the son not being of your ahl. So 40, حتى إذا جاء أمرنا وفازت النور. If you look from over there, saying that your son epitomizes unrighteous action. Why? Because the son was extended the invitation to board the ark. This is kind of what you're supposed to be doing right now. The amal salih for you is manifest in you getting on, preserving your life and kind of accepting this as the correct course of action. He chose an alternative. So notice how the alternative of the son was not irrational, at least from where I stand. Again, I wasn't there to observe. I can't see the water levels. But it seemed to me, for the son and many others that were there, how they were observing the situation, and said, well, look, there are plenty of options we have available. It looks like the sea level is rising. One option is to get aboard this ark. I don't think the son denied the efficacy of that. But another alternative in his mind was, well, I can just go on top of this mountain. And I'll be high enough that I really won't be at risk of drowning because the water is definitely not going to get this high. So look at that. Look at the rationalization right there. He's making sense of his situation by saying that, like, it's not going to get this bad. We're never going to get to that point. Because if he knew he was going to ultimately drown, it would be completely irrational. It would be idiotic for him to go on top of the mountain. He's just, buying himself time, but he's more or less living on borrowed time. He would have gone on the ark. So his identification of the alternative was for him rationalizing. The problem, though, that Allah is bringing this to the attention of not just Nuh alayhi salam, but to us, it's saying, listen, amal salih is not good things in the abstract. Sometimes they're not even things that seem really rational. There are things that occur that exceed your ability to understand the situation. The circumstances are so complex that you'll only begin to appreciate it sometime in the future with hindsight. So that's where your trust in the divine kind of like injunctions, the prophetic model, the Abrahamic model, the Husseini model makes sense there. So when we're talking about the the efficacy of the Husseini movement, how effective it can be, and really thinking and reflecting just brother to brother, sister to sister, have we maximized what this can do for us as a community, and then beyond that, the larger world? I think the answer is very confidently, I would say, no, there's much, much more that can be produced as a result of that. One of maybe the challenges, and this is kind of, we have to resolve this, is maybe our understanding of righteous action is a little bit skewed. Because as far as, for me personally, I find that the logic of the son of Noah was not so bad, but he's censured, and I don't know of how many people are really criticized that way in the Quran. this should be this should kind of draw our attention, and it should be a wake-up call. And I hope the point I'm making is not lost in my kind of inarticulate presentation. What I'm trying to say is that what Imam Hussein ﷺ did himself, and then also what he represented and what he was trying to get us towards, require a class of righteous actions. See, there were plenty of other people during the time of the Imam that were rationalizing, right? And again, I wish there was more time to open this up. The Imam spoke with a lot of different people on his way to Karbala. And many of them were, they were well-wishers. There were some others that it's kind of unclear what their motivations are, or maybe their ulterior motives, because there was a power struggle there. There was the potential for a vacuum, and people wanted to kind of assume power. So some people told the Imam, don't go or go. They were thinking about their own interests. But there were a handful of people that were not. No, they were well-wishers. So they wanted the best for the Imam, if you want. Their way of understanding was, don't go. There's no reason to do this. It's not worth it. Just stay here. We'll make things work. It's okay. All of those suggestions that were given to the Imam, all the alternatives that were imagined by these people around the Imam, all of them in the abstract seem like good things. They all seem like amalun salih. But there's a reason why the Imam does what he does. It's because his amalun salih, and going back to that working definition, is the action that corresponds to the divine decree. What is it that God wants me to do here? What is it that Allah wants? What is it that pleases God? So thinking in those terms nuances our understanding of what it means to do good. So, kind of contextualize this in whatever your endeavors are. If they're personal endeavors, there's a lot of ways to succeed in life, but there are better and worse ways. There are a lot of ways to build the community, but there are better and worse ways. So there may be kind of ways that we're imagining because of the simplicity. I don't mean, God forbid, as a derogatory category. I just mean like we think about them in such binaries. Like there's good and there's bad. So if it's not bad, then it's good. No, that's not true. Look, the example of the son of Noah is very strong. His choice of going on top of the mountain was not a bad choice. It was not an irrational choice, but it is personified as being the epitome of unrighteous conduct. That's all I'm saying. All I'm saying is to appreciate the complexity that is the Quranic message, but also the actions of the Imam. So number two is it is the ability to perform righteous action. And again, like I said, each of these have their own further, we can further expound on what these mean in our certain context, and I'll leave that to the larger community to inshallah work through these, and I'm happy to contribute to. Number three, and I'll just list a few of the other them because I know we have 2 or 3 minutes and it's time for salat, so just for this not to remain incomplete. Number three is that the movement of Imam al-Hussein is incredibly comprehensive. It's not exclusive to a certain number of people. And especially in this day and age, I think the concept of representation is really important. And this is especially true for younger people or the younger generation. What our young people see around them positively or negatively shapes their expectations for themselves and for each other. So what's unique about Karbala is that it not only has a message and lessons that resonates with all people, regardless of religion, creed, ethnicity, time period. It's a universal message, and I think it is appreciated. But it involves agents that are representative of most of society. And like we said, that representation is important because, as they say in, basic psychology, if a person can see it, then they can be it. Especially with children, say, if he or she can see it, then he or she can be it. So our children are learning as early as possible from their experiences, especially in their consumption of media. That shapes what they imagine as being possible for people who look like them, who sound like them, who act like them, who live where they live, who come from where they come from. So if we want to kind of summarize this, our children determine what they can be in life and how they can contribute to the world based on the examples around them. So this is what makes Karbala so powerful. It's not just like one type of a person from one type of a background, or one type of ethnicity, and one type of religion. You have a comprehensiveness here in age. So you have the elderly that are present and are active, both in battle, both in their support of just presence. We have men who are fighting and not fighting. We have women who are observing, who are participating, who are martyred, who are tortured. We have younger people, again, in a variety of ages. So again, if he or she can see it, they can be it. You have examples of younger people who respond and react to the circumstances that they find themselves in. That's the right action there. And finally, we have children there too, from nursing children all the way to early adolescence. So this comprehensiveness also is really a powerful tool for what makes the mission of Imam al-Hussein, the example of Imam al-Hussein, so powerful. I think I'll, inshallah, end there because we're out of time. There were 7 that I wanted to speak of. I'll list the last 4. Number 4 is the concept of leadership, and there's a particular conception of leadership here that I think is important. Number 5 is that the movement is justice seeking. It's not to serve any other purpose, or it's not to serve justice and then also other things too. Number 7 is the supporters of the movement. They really make this movement what it is. And finally, it is the element that we're, of course, very familiar with, is the notion of the tragedy and the enslavement of Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam. So I want to thank you all for this opportunity. I hope these reflections were helpful. I'm happy to be in conversation when the opportunity presents itself. I apologize if it was too